guys, we're here today to go over my predictions on how you guys should be using HISUI ZOROARK when it drops this January in Pokemon Legends Arceus. If you guys enjoy the content, of course, leave a like below and subscribe for more content just like this. With that said, let's set a like goal of let's set a like goal at 25 likes, just because I know a lot of people seem to want this type of video, and I'm sure that this will hopefully reach a new audience. So we'll see. We'll set a like goal for 25 likes within the first 48 hours. If you guys can do that, we'll bring another one next week. So with that said, let's get right into it. So first things first, I do want to establish for anyone who already has commented down below that a certain move is not in this Pokemon. One, you did not watch through the first 45 seconds, and two, this is literally, if you check the date, like 3-4 weeks before release. So this is speculation. This is speculation. I don't know if I'm actually going to edit the word speculation over the top. It's pretty close to the upload time for this, but speculation. So this is what I'm assuming will be coming on this Pokemon. And I do want to preface as well, a lot of these moves are actually already possible on regular Zoroark, with a couple exceptions in the last set we're going to go over today. So I don't even think they're that out there, and they still fit the typing pretty well for what we do know. So we do know this is a normal ghost type, and that's all we know. Now, there are things that we can infer, though, based off of trailers, such as the fact that we'll probably keep Illusion, which makes sense as a Zoroark staple, and I don't see it changing this gen personally. So yeah, with that said, our first set is a Life Orb Zoroark. Now, initially, I was thinking that regardless of stat spread, that because of the fact that Zoroark was regular, like Unovan Zoroark was a special attacker, the HISUI Zoroark was probably a physical attacker. However, even if that's the case, this difference, assuming it keeps the same difference that regular Zoroark has, might be minuscule enough to where you still want to run special. Because realistically, as a normal type, a lot of normal types get really good special options. And this would probably still keep Nasty Plot, in my opinion, as a ghost type. I don't see that really changing, especially when they upped the learnability for this move as of Generation 8. So my prediction is that one of the best sets to run will be a Life Orb set with Nasty Plot, Shadow Ball, Focus Blast, and Hyper Voice. Now, to be fair, you could just as easily make this a Swords Dance set. As mentioned, it has, like, Unovan Zoroark has pretty similar attack and special attack, with the special attack leaning slightly higher. So if it was to just swap that, you could easily probably make this work with a physical set, and I'll go over that later. But my prediction is, though, is that the special set will probably be better even if the special attack is lower, as long as it's not just some drastic degree. With Shadow Ball and Focus Blast hitting pretty much everything, is basically functioning as a lower tier special Marshadow, with Illusion actually giving a lot of potential here to use that Nasty Plot, because your opponent's going to have to really play around that Ghost normal typing, which is so much more threatening than just a pure Dark typing, considering the fact that this Pokemon has like one weakness, and it's to Dark types, and that's really it. So if you're setting up on something like, for example, maybe a Fighting type, and it's debating clicking Knockoff or Close Combat, you can maybe have it bluff being let's say like a Psychic type, right? Actually, no, not a Psychic type, because it would knock off that every time. But maybe something that would like resist Dark. You could have it bluffing, like a Fairy type. A Fairy type would be really good there, because you force out the Fighting type either way there. This means that you can get a free Nasty Plot turn, and then Shadow Ball, Hyper Voice, and Focus Blast are pretty free range at that point. With the max speed, realistically, unless this Pokemon has like 140, 150 speed, which I cannot see it having that drastic of a speed jump, you're probably just going to want to run max speed Timid. The 105 that Zoroark normally hits with the Unovan form already leads me to believe that this will probably keep a similar speed tier. We've seen that happen with Pokemon like the Ninetales, for example, and the Sandslashes, so I don't really see that changing for this Pokemon either. But that should hopefully mean that a Life Orb set with this Pokemon would be terrifying, especially with Nasty Plot being a really good option for this. Next up, we want to go over the Choice Spec set. Now, personally, I think this will actually be the weakest of the sets that I'm covering today. I did still want to cover it nonetheless, though. We have U-Turn, Shadow Ball, Hyper Voice, and Focus Blast. Now, I threw in U-Turn here, but you can probably switch that for Trick if you wanted to. I do feel like as well you can make Hyper Voice the Trick slot, but I think if nothing else, you really need Focus Blast and Shadow Ball, because on any special variant, this pretty much rounds out your entire coverage, with Shadow Ball hitting most Pokemon pretty well, at least for neutral, if not better, and then Focus Blast is great for Dark types as well as for normal types for the Shadow Ball, so they handle each other really well in my opinion. With the speed, again, you're just going to want to hit max speed on any sort of HISUI Zoroark. Unless it has really abysmal speed, which I can't see a Pokemon this slim having, especially when it's coming off of Unovan Zoroark. I think that, again, the speed is probably going to be mandatory here. Now, one of the things that I like having U-turn on this set for is to allow you to get the pivot option in case your opponent's trying to play a double. Because if they, for some reason, do get to a point where they can narrow out pretty quickly what your Zoroark is and isn't, the illusion ability is going to definitely lose its charm, so keeping that momentum to apply offensive pressure is really useful. And you could also bluff this as a fighting type, like let's say something like an Infernape or a Manchow, potentially if you're playing national decks, or depending on what allows are in the game, like even if we're, let's say, going off of just a Sword and Shield allow list. Manchow, again, great option there for a momentum getting fighting type. It's around the same speed tier too, so you can actually pair these two really well in my opinion, and then get a really nice bluff going for whether you're the Manchow or the Zoroark. So I do definitely like that a lot. I think it's a really strong option, and if you're gonna run specs, I think this would probably be the set. Now, personally, again, I feel like a Nasty Plot is probably the better option here. Mostly just because of the fact that you're going to be able to actually set up and break past stuff. Whereas with the specs, you're kind of just locking yourself in the items. You're taking out the threateningness that this ghost normal typing actually provides you. Because even if you're not clicking the Hyper Voice, you're still able to then not necessarily freely click Focus Blast. And Focus Blast is a difficult move to lock into. Now, if this Pokemon gets Aura Sphere, I think this could actually be a bit more justifiable, because you're not going to be risking accuracy at that point just to hit your Dark types and then later have something else come in and take advantage of you, because you're not going to want to risk a 70% accurate move. So I do think this set has a bit of drawbacks, but it's still a threatening set nonetheless, because if it keeps the exact stat line of Unova and Zoroark, that's a 125 special attack hit with the choice specs right there, so it's not something you want to underestimate. Next up in the team, I want to go over the Scarf set. Now, personally, I think this will actually be the best variant. Similar to specs, you can throw on Trick over U-turn or Hyper Voice. On the Scarf set, though, I would probably throw it on over Hyper Voice, whereas the spec set, I think I would probably throw it on over U-turn. Reason being is the thing that on Scarf, having this thing have U-turn is so much more valuable because you're able to outpace a lot of the base 100s, which is a fairly common speed tier, and then pivot out on those sort of Scarfers. They might reach the 195 mark. So things in the Sword and Shield decks, like for example, Darmanitan is a pretty not bad Scarfer, especially Galar Darmanitan, which leads me to my next point. I think that the Scarf set personally will actually have some really good Uber viability. Now, when I say this, I want to preface that this Pokemon will not be like some broken Uber's Pokemon. This will probably be like a C+, B- Uber's viable Pokemon with this specific set. And the reason being is the fact of Marshadow existing. Now, Marshadow existing alone already makes this Pokemon have some sort of niche in Ubers, no matter what set you're running. As long as you're able to make sure that you're hitting Marshadow before it hits you. Because you're immune to Shadow Sneak, you're also immune to Spectral Thief, and you're immune to Close Combat, which are 3 moves that Marshadow will typically run. Now, to be fair, if Marshadow's running something like, let's say, Rock Tomb or Ice Punch, it should have a good time against you anyway. But it does still need to pick to actually run not stab options, which there are some Marshadows that run like Triple Ghost with Poltergeist, Spectral Thief, Shadow Sneak. It's very, to be fair, I've seen it very, very rarely, but I've seen it a little bit. Obviously, it could also be maybe a Bulk Up Stabs Marshadow, so there are sets that would not run coverage. However, because of this Pokemon existing, if it was to take off in the Uber format, it could actually force Marshadow to have to run that 4th option. So I think that the Scarf option already plays into your favor there, because as long as your opponent doesn't have webs, you're going to guarantee a pace and then be able to go for a Shadow Ball. Now, to be fair, I will say that this would require actually some buffs to the special attack to be truly reliable, but if you pair this with a Spiker, it could honestly be fine even just with the 125 mark. To put into perspective though, with Zoroark, if you were to make this a Ghost typing, and you were to throw on Shadow Ball, even just off of the 125, the 120 special attack, and we Calcus versus Marshadow. I'm actually pulling up the calcs right now. So a Scarf set, you could potentially also go with Modest, to be fair, if you're running this in Ubers. And I would recommend, if you're running this in Ubers, going with Modest over Timid. But I like Timid better if you're playing this in like an OUUU sort of format. Ubers, though, doesn't have as many of those high base speed Pokemon that are hitting 100s. With Modest, you're able to still creep the 90 mark, which is great for stuff like Kyogre if you needed to last ditch hit it. But with Modest Shadow Ball from a Scarf set, though, you do 92 to 109, which means that any Life Orb Marshadow is going to be guaranteed taken out at least by its own hit in return. And personally, I think trading a Zoroark for a Marshadow is a very, very worthwhile trade, even if it's a Hisui one. So, realistically, with, let's say, a 125 special attack, though, this brings up the roll to guarantee the KO after Rocks, and then with, I believe it was 135, 135 was the one that guarantees the KO flat out versus Marshadow. So they can obviously buff the special attack to do that a bit more, or even with something like a Poltergeist on a physical set if this Pokemon ends up being a physical Pokemon and it keeps Poltergeist, which I guess would be dependent on mostly Sword and Shield transfers. But if you were to, let's say, just run Poltergeist, this would actually guarantee the KO even with the 1 of 5 attack. So that is also something actually you could throw in there. You could potentially make this like a physical Scarfer or even a mixed Scarfer, to be there. Because with Naive, you actually could invest this pretty easily from Marshadow by throwing on just 92 attack. So to each their own, there are a lot of variations with Scarf, but it really just comes down to even nuances. I could definitely throw on a visual on screen, which I guess I'll cut to right now. So sorry about the cut there. I actually, as talking about this, wanted to just throw up the visual for the Poltergeist spread, just to have it on screen. But I would recommend, if you're going to go with the mixed variation, to throw in Poltergeist and Shadow Ball. Biggest reason being is that you're not going to want to click Shadow Ball, Poltergeist I should say, as spammably, because it is missing accuracy, so you'd really only want to throw it on if you need to guarantee the KO and keep Zoroark alive. But in specifically Ubers, I would actually consider this just because Marshadow will always be one of the best Pokemon on the tier. It's something like Arc Normal, to where even with Marshadow being a used Pokemon, it still will adapt. So even with HISUI ZOROARK, if it was to be a Scarf that picked up in Ubers, Marshadow will still adapt. It'll just throw on webs, so you do want to make sure you have the option just in case to hit something else if you cannot reliably take out Marshadow with this. But this would be the, I guess, the naive set for specifically Ubers. If it ends up getting Poltergeist as well, it could definitely be good with the... this also assumes, by the way, the exact stat line as Zoroark. The EVs would change accordingly, but basically the point would be to KO Marshadow with that. Final set, though, would be a physical set. Now, I did mention a physical set, and I threw on Shadow Claw here. However, again, Poltergeist, if it does end up getting that, would be just as good of an option here as the physical Ghost option. Shadow Sneak, Low Kick, and U-Turn would be the other 3 moves, and personally, I think you do kind of need all of these on a physical set. The biggest reason being is I don't think that Sword Stance with Shadow Sneak would be as reliable, because you're really just going with Ghost Fighting, and to be fair, Ghost Fighting is phenomenal, but when your fighting attack is Low Kick, that's very weight dependent. Now, if this got something like Close Combat, let's say, or Drain Punch, I think Sword Dance could be really good, but Low Kick, I feel like isn't a move that you're going to be clicking on a lot of Pokemon that are going to switch in. It's really just meant for stuff like T-Tar, I would say, in terms of Dark types, to which T-Tar, to be fair, would be very good against. Now, in terms of how you'd play a set, I think you just play it as a hit-and-run Pokemon, with U-Turn just spamming off until you're able to click Shadow Sneak and KO something really easily. So I'm personally much more of a fan of physical just running for attacks. However, again, you could probably ditch U-Turn for Sword Stance and it would fill the same role. I wouldn't really run a Bandit set with this sort of attack, though, because Shadow Sneak and Poltergeist both have a lot of drawbacks, unlike Shadow Ball, which is extremely clickable, with Shadow Claw truthfully just being a very weak attack, and also with the fact that you might want to click Shadow Sneak more personally on a Bandit set, but Shadow Sneak also, again, just a very weak attack, and I guess with Poltergeist, the issue would be the accuracy thing, similar to Focus Blast, so I don't know if I would necessarily lock this Pokemon into moves if it's physical. I think that Life Orb with either U-Turn or just a Sword Stance set would be better. Though, you could definitely make a physical Scarf set, and I would truthfully just keep the same 3 moves as U-Turn, Shadow Claw, and Low Kick, and then at that point, it really just depends on the coverage. You could throw on like a Fire Punch or an Ice Punch there. Really just because they're good attacks, not because it really needs the coverage, because Shadow Claw and Low Kick hit that well. You could also just go with Shadow Sneak, which, to be fair, the reason for this would truthfully just be in case of webs are up, and you really just wanted a priority attack against other Ghost types, because they couldn't really Shadow Sneak you in return. However, that would be such a niche scenario that I'm not entirely sure if it's worth pursuing. With that said, though, hopefully you guys did enjoy today's video, and if you did, leave a like below and subscribe. Let me know if there's anything you guys would suggest to improve this sort of video, because it's the first time I've done it in a while. The last one being before BDSP, and channel's changed a lot since then, so I want to know if you guys have anything that you would like to see. Comment down below the Hisui Pokemon you want to see next, and with that said, I will see you guys in the next one. Peace out, guys.